welcome to the Wolfpack Wellness Research web series. I am your host, Dr. Suzie Goodell, an Associate Professor of Nutrition in the Department of Food Bioprocessing and Nutrition Sciences. This series is a collaboration between the University Wellness Advisory Committee, the NC State Libraries, and NC State Wellness and Recreation. We aim to discuss the wellness research happening across NC State's campus. For those of you who are joining us live via Zoom, you can submit your questions to our speaker in the chat function. We'll have a Q&A time at the end of the show. Today's guest is Dr. Sid Thakur. He is a multi-award winner and is a professor of molecular epidemiology in the College of Veterinary Medicine. He is the director of global health program in the College of Veterinary Medicine at NC State. Among other foci in his research, Dr. Thakur seeks to understand how antimicrobial resistance develops in superbugs that affect animal and human health. So we want to welcome you to our show, Dr. Thakur, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodell. Great to be here. And maybe I can just extend a little bit more of what I do and then for the questions and answers. So I've been a faculty here for 14 years. And I did my PhD also at NC State. And then I did a postdoc with the Center for Veterinary Medicine, Food and Drug Administration up in Maryland. I was an Oak Ridge research fellow there focusing on drug resistance. And then in 2007, I came back as a faculty. So it's been great here. I wear two hats, one for my own research, and then of course as the director of the Global Health Program, focusing on drug-resistant pathogens. These are pathogens that impact not just animal health, but human health and have a big reservoir in the environment. So I use a One Health approach to target these pathogens, looking at both animal, humans, and the environment. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what I do in my lab as we move forward. Thanks so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here. So my first question really is, can you tell us a little bit about your research lab and specifically talking about antimicrobial resistance?
Yes, so my background is molecular epidemiology, focused on drug-resistant pathogens. As I mentioned, strong collaboration, not just in animal health, but also in human health and in environmental sciences, because I think you need an approach to focus on all the three compartments to find solutions to a very big problem. I know right now we are all focusing on COVID, but hopefully COVID will go away one day with all the vaccinations and other measures that we are taking. But there are no vaccines against drug-resistant pathogens, and there are no new class of antimicrobials. And in addition to that, in the US, we don't have access to antimicrobials or drugs without a prescription. In majority of the world, you can have access to antibiotics without any prescription. So the use of antimicrobials at the global level creates these hotspots of emerging new bacterial pathogens with the unique mechanisms of resistance. And one of my major focus is to identify these hotspots and to find out how we can stop these pathogens from traveling around the world. And as COVID has shown that pathogens don't respect international boundaries. So as part of the Global Health Director, that is also one of my major focus, is to really understand why these pathogens are becoming resistant, how quickly they move across, and what we can do to help our public health agencies to stop these pathogens in their tracks. My lab also is host to two national surveillance programs focused on drug resistance. They're both funded by the Food and Drug Administration. Actually, I was told that this is the only educational institution that has these two programs. So I'm really proud of it. The first one is the Genome Tracker program, which actually helps us generate whole genome sequence profile of these pathogens from around the world, and to really compare these profiles, like E. coli in the US, it is similar or different to E. coli from China, for example. And the second program is called the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System. And my lab generates the drug resistance profiles of multiple pathogens from retail meats in North Carolina that you and I buy, okay, and seafood also. Again, as part of the surveillance to really understand, how these strains are getting into our food systems, and what we can do to prevent them. So the major focus of my research is food safety and public health, focusing through my research on drug-resistant pathogens in animal, humans, and the environment.
So, you've talked a lot about the idea of drug-resistant pathogens. Can you talk a little bit more for those of us who aren't as familiar about what really causes this drug resistance?
Yeah. So pathogens, it's a very simple Darwinian concept of survival of the fittest. When pathogens are exposed to these antibiotics in different concentrations, the concentration that can kill the pathogen is good. But when they're exposed to concentrations called subtherapeutic concentration, which is just below the therapeutic concentration, sometimes they make changes in the genome as because of the exposure to these antibiotics, uh, uh, and they generate or sometimes exchange these resistance mechanisms from other pathogens and become resistant. They also have a simple genome, they multiply very fast, and there are millions and billions. So resistance development happens when they're exposed to antibiotics, and there are many, it can be simple, it can be complicated ways of becoming resistant. But once they become resistant, they tend to stay resistant for a long time. Even we have seen, even when you take out that antibiotics out of the environment, they tend to stay resistant. So it's a concept of selection pressure, but it's simple. It's simply really survival of the fittest. And the ones that become resistant will survive for a long time, and they are the ones that we should be afraid of. And as you can see at the global level, resistance is a big problem. A lot of people may not know, but by the year 2050, it's projected that deaths in humans by drug-resistant pathogens will be around 10 million every year, compared to 8.2 million for cancer. COVID has killed 4 million people in the world, so you can just compare the numbers. But as I said in the beginning, there's no vaccine for drug-resistant pathogens. It's a challenge. What we need is new class of antimicrobials, and there are none.
So, in basic terms, knowing that there's a lot going on with drug resistance and trying to find antimicrobials that aren't drug resistant, how do you approach the problem?
So, what as researchers and as scientists, I think one of the key things we always recommend is the judicious use of antimicrobials, whether it's on the animal side, whether it's on the human side, and whether how much we are using in the environment. It's a combined effort. That's why the One Health approach is very important. You can't just focus on the animals and expect the situation in the humans is going to improve, and vice versa also. It has to be looked at all the three different levels, and that's what we do in my lab. Is we have collaborations with med schools, we have collaboration within the veterinary institutions, and then also working very closely with environmental scientists, and that's when you can really find solutions. And really, from my perspective, we can do all the surveillance we want to do in the US or in developed nations, but it has to be a global effort. You cannot be, you can't expect to be in the US doing all the surveillance and totally ignore what's going on in other parts of the world, because as I said, pathogens move very fast. And I can give you so many examples of pathogens emerging in some other part of the world and then landing in the US, sometimes in a matter of months, sometimes in a couple of years, and then spread within the country. So global surveillance, a global effort, a One Health approach is very important to really find solutions to control this massive problem that is becoming bigger every day, to be honest with you.
So when you talk about the one global solution, how is that approach? What does it look like in terms of being able to identify where there's a problem and how to address that problem?
Yes, so I think a lot of that has to do with lack of information coming from many parts of the world. I think the College of Veterinary Medicine is a World Health Organization collaborating center on One Health and antimicrobial resistance. One of 18 such institutions that have this designation. And WHO is playing a very important role through the GLASS program, which is the Global Surveillance of Antimicrobial Resistance program that it exists. A lot of that program is not just to find out what the problems are, but also raising infrastructure and training people and educating them. I think that is the big problem. Drug resistance can be a complicated topic to understand, and to really make people understand that here's a problem. We are ourselves very much, on the human side. How many times a physician has told us, take this, pill that's going to leave a bitter taste in your mouth 3 times a day for a week, and we feel better after 3 days, and we don't realize I'm fine now, I don't need it anymore. That's a problem, because what we have basically done is killed all the susceptible population in our gut and basically selected the resistant population. And but at the global level, WHO is doing a lot of amazing things, because it has that platform to do it. But as researchers, we are really the nuts and bolts of that big engine, to really educate people, train people. We have collaborations with UNC Chapel Hill, the Billings School of Public Health, to do something very similar in Malawi, which is a small small country in Southeast Africa. So it's a small steps that you need to take to educate people, to train people at the global level to really find solutions to this problem.
So when you're doing training, what types of people are you, or who are you working with? Are you working with physicians? Are you working with farmers? Are you working with individuals who are maybe needing to take antibiotics?
Pretty much everyone that you just listed over here. So when we are doing this training, we are again doing in collaboration with MDs, with veterinarians, with people with environmental science, all of them together. So the Malawi example I just gave you, we are responsible for setting up a surveillance and training program for drug-resistant pathogens in their poultry production system, which is a big sector, upcoming sector. A lot of people like to consume chicken, and that's what we are doing in that country. And then UNC Chapel Hill comes in, with the physicians and working with their public health agencies over here in Malawi. So it's a concerted effort. It's a joint effort. People with different expertise have to come. That's why our global health program is multidisciplinary in approach. One person cannot do everything, but a team of people can do it. They bring their expertise to the table. So we are working with physicians, with public health agencies, with veterinarians, with local people over there to really to find solutions to the problem, because we have seen in the past, single institution, single individual just cannot do it. It's impossible. It's a big problem.
Yeah. And so you've got all these different institutions interacting, individual researchers and educators. How do you measure success? What does success look like in this field?
Yeah, so I typically show a table that covers success. Where do you see ourselves? It's all the way from short-term success to mid-term success to long-term success. And I look at success in terms of what impact you have made. So I look at short-term success is somebody like me presenting in conferences and having manuscripts out there. A midterm success would be people are really looking at what you're doing and actually using your data to make changes, or maybe generating new policies. So for us, that impact is very important. At the end of the day, if the work that I do can help in preventing spread of pathogens around the world, and can also make policy changes that the local governments can start using, and making some changes within their own infrastructure and the way they do things to prevent the emergence of these resistant strains, that is impactful. And so that's where we are. When we do this countrywide grants and country level work, that's when I think our work is really impactful.
So when you talk about policy change, what are some examples of changes that you would like to see, either at the local, or as you said, at the national or even global level?
Yes, a lot of things are important. I think having a control of how much antimicrobial are used, and whether it's animal production or whether it's in human medicine, and preventing the free access to antibiotics is very important. Okay, I think the problem happens when you can just go to a store and get whatever you want without a prescription. That's a problem. We see that problem in big countries also, where big people, lots of animals, and unrestricted use of antimicrobial. That's a problem. So I think that would be number one, is to really prevent this over-the-counter use of antimicrobial. That is number one. I think some of the excuse me, some of the changes in infrastructure are very important. you know Antimicrobial is not the only solution to control these pathogens. Cleaner farms, better biosecurity measures, can also can also be used to raise healthy animals. But the challenge is big. We all talk about 10 billion human population on this planet, and how are we going to feed them, right? We have to, improve our current agricultural practices by almost 70% to feed this 10 billion population, which is not very far away, a decade or so away. How can we raise that animal to provide the nutrition? It's challenging, it's challenging. So those are the areas that I would see as impactful. Judicious use of antimicrobials. Now, this can be local or the regional level. Better biosecurity measures to prevent these animals from getting sick, and then working, humans, animals, and the environmental sectors are working together. Many times in the world of antimicrobial resistance, there's a lot of, eat it, sheet it kind of thing, pointing fingers. That has not led to any amazing solutions, to the best of my knowledge, and I've been working in this field for almost 20 years now. But when we work together, that's when we find solutions, and that's what we need to do.
So certainly working together is beneficial, but sometimes there's some controversy involved with, let's say, let's not make these drugs available over the counter. So I'd love to hear more about what kind of challenges and controversies come up when proposing these new policies.
Yes, so in the US, for example, there is no over-the-counter use anymore. The President Obama's administration, had FDA guidance 209 and 213 that sort of took care of that part. Same thing in the European Union. There is no use of antimicrobials for growth promotion purposes in animals, and that has been existence for 10-15 years now. So some things work, but I think some of the challenges are also when we start expecting that not using antimicrobials is going to just solve the problem. We have seen that doesn't happen all the times. It is very dependent on what pathogens you're talking about. Not all pathogens are the same. They behave in a very different way. They react in a very different way. So there is no magic, there's no silver bullet over here that's going to solve all the problems. The challenges come when the physicians look at the animal industry and say, rampant use of antimicrobials leads to resistance development, and then transition along the food chain, and then you have this resistance problem. I think it can go both ways, but I think that's why I always say you got to work together, and that's very important. The animal industry, I've done a lot of work with them. It's do an amazing job in judicious use of antimicrobials. I know in the US and in the EU also, because for them, animal health and human health is very important. Those are the two important things, right? So it's a work in progress. I think more confidence building measures are also very important. I don't see many conferences that bring physicians and veterinarians to work together, right? So I think those type of platforms need to be there. And then, of course, we also have to find, alternates to antimicrobials. I think those are very important. How can we raise a healthy animal without using antimicrobials at all? I mean, wouldn't that be fantastic? And that's where the biosecurity measures and, clean farms, healthy living, all those concepts are very important.
So one of the things, I'm not an antimicrobial expert, but I would think that one of the things that individuals who're saying take the over-the-counter antimicrobials off the market, particularly in developing countries where healthcare is limited, what kind of pushback or concerns have you seen related to, well, people don't have access to healthcare, but here's something that they could do, and now you're taking it away from us? What is that like?
It's a challenge. So if you if you raise a pig in a commercial setting, it takes around 26 weeks of age for the pig to mature around 250 pounds before it's processed. And outdoor backyard pig can take almost twice that amount of time because there are no antimicrobials in the environment, but it just takes so much more time for the pig to mature and gain weight. Um, that sort of luxury is not available in many of the developing parts of the world. You have a growing population, a need for protein. There has to be a balance in different efforts. So if you just go and say, well, we're not going to give you access to antibiotics anymore, you have to figure out how you're going to raise that animal for another 4 months before it's ready for market. That conversation is not going to go well. Okay. So baby steps is important. Trust building efforts are important. Showing the value of biosecurity measures, vaccinations in animals is important. Once you do that and you show the impact, I think that's when you start building trust. But I think right now, when you look at many of the developing countries, I think this is where WHO is doing an amazing job in terms of education, in terms of training. Also, all the different countries are part of the WHO GLASS network, where they have given recommendations that this is the amount of antimicrobial we're going to reduce by this and this amount of time, which I think is really, really a positive step moving forward. But these things take time. Uh, you can't wave a magic wand and it's going to go away, but it's in the right direction. And it's really, really, really a problem that's facing that we are facing right now. It's not happening 20 years, 30 years from now. It's right here. And we need to move fast.
So thank you so much for all of that information. And I have tons more questions, but before I ask them, I want to make sure that our audience is aware that you can put your questions in the chat box. Right now we don't have any, but if something comes up, please feel free to put those in the chat box. This is the time to do it. We just have a few more minutes left with Dr. Thakur. Oh, look, we have one from Hillary. How quickly does resistance develop for a pathogen? Are there certain types of pathogens that are better at developing drug resistance?
Yeah, so there are two types of resistance, big boxes. One is the intrinsic resistance, where the pathogens are just resistant by default. The challenge is the acquired resistance. So this is when a pathogen which is not resistant becomes resistant because it comes in close interaction with another pathogen that had this resistance mechanism, and it just transfers it to the other one. It can happen very fast. It can happen overnight. I mean, they're all close together. I always tell people, a pig can pick up a particular strain of salmonella from the environment and start shedding it in the feces in 30 minutes. It's a very fast process. Typically, what we have seen is gram negatives, enterobacteriaceae like E. coli, salmonellas, campylobacter. I mean, these are very good at picking up new resistance genes from the environment, especially E. coli. We all carry E. coli in our guts. It's commensal. I call E. coli as a train station where everybody just comes, mingles, and then just goes to their own destinations. That's what E. coli does. It's an amazing pathogen that acts as a reservoir of genes and can move them across. And when pathogens are from the same family, then they're also very much more amenable to exchange these resistance genes across each other. It's a fast process, and then when a gene jumps into something called a plasmid, which is an extra chromosomal DNA material, then they can also go horizontally in addition to being vertically disseminated. So that's why it's a big problem. But gram negatives typically are much more open to these type of exchanges happening in the environment.
So yes, thank you, Hillary. She says that's very interesting. Thank you very much. If we have any other questions, please feel free to type those in the chat box. While we're doing that, oh wait, we got another one. Hillary asks again, if there was plenty of funding or money, what research project would you want to see happen that could have the biggest impact on understanding drug resistance in pathogens?
Well, I think we already know a lot about it. I think we are at a stage where we need to find solutions, and we need new drugs to target these pathogens. So the last class of antimicrobial was invented, or almost, I would say, around 40 years ago. So the new drugs that you see are basically side chain modifications of existing drugs, and the reason for that is pharmaceutical industries spend billions of dollars and almost 5 to 10 years before a new class of antimicrobial is generated, and pathogens can become resistant to it by the very next day. And so the challenge is there's not good return on investment, but we still need to, invest in finding new drugs, maybe try and find new biologicals, like plant-based biologicals that don't have existing resistance mechanisms that we know. I think that's where the research needs to go. I think the surveillance part needs to be further strengthened. It's not there, even though multiple agencies are working at different levels. There's still a lot of lack of information. And then governments working across together, say under the WHO umbrella, is an amazing thing. That's really, really important. That's where I would put the money. I'll put also a lot of money in educating people. I don't think people really appreciate what we are dealing with unless they get impacted by it. So all these different efforts ultimately leading to policy changes that is being enacted. Sometimes countries have policies, but they're just there on paper.
Mhm.
Really make it work at the ground level is very important.
Thank you. So Cindy has a question. She says, do you have any guidance for what we as individuals can do or avoid doing to help with this problem? Or is this all too big for individual action to have any real effect?
No, I think individual action is very important. Is very important. Simple things like, if you're given a drug for a treatment, follow it all the way through. I think we are all responsible for everything. I think the pandemic has also shown that, when everyone works together, then you can see some, light at the end of the tunnel. I think individual actions are very important. Educating ourselves is very important. And then, spreading the word around. Look, we have a challenge that we have, and I think we should all work together. I think that's important. It has to be a ground up, effort, and I think it just starts to go up. And you can see it, when there are new challenges that we face in drug resistance, then you'll see more money coming in, whether it's through industry money, whether it's federal funds. But a lot of comes through researchers and scientists saying, hey, we got a problem, I think you should put more money in this. One Health was a very a term that was not very common, maybe even 10 years ago, 10-15 years ago. I see people know what it is. I think the pandemic has also shown you can have a virus that can emerge in a bat and pangolin, and then through the environment end up in humans. Right now we are focusing on vaccinations for humans, but eventually somebody's going to get into those caves and figure out what coronavirus is doing over there and how we can prevent it from coming out. And I think that we have to work as individuals to really, try and make a difference. Everybody has to work together on it.
Thank you so much for that. So I do want to thank you again for everything you've done. That's all the time we have today.
Sure.
And I want to thank everyone who is able to join us today, as well as those who are going to watch us later. I want to remind everyone that we broadcast every third Friday of the month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And next month's show will include an interview with Dr. Carrie Lewis from Health and Exercise Studies, and she'll be discussing exercise for students with ADHD. You can find more information about the Wolfpack Wellness Research Web Series and previous show recordings at the Wolfpack-Wellness website. And I'm your host, Dr. Suzie Goodell. Until next time, be well.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting again. I really appreciate
Thank
it. Thanks so much.
you.
Bye.
Bye.